Clear your desk. We don't need you and your useless checklist. The new CFO smirked loud enough for half the office to hear. The words cracked through the room like a whip. A couple of analysts froze mid-keystroke. Someone coughed just to break the silence. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just smiled. He thought he'd landed his first public kill. The man's name was Victor Hale. Freshly imported from a bigger firm, shiny MBA. Hair slicked back with the confidence of someone who believed arrogance was a leadership style. He strutted in like the company was his personal playground. And from the moment he arrived, he made it clear people like me, quiet, methodical, the ones who checked every line in the contract, were obstacles, not assets. Procurement is dead weight. He barked, pacing in front of my desk as if it were a courtroom. We don't need binders, protocols, or these ridiculous checklists. He held up one of my printed compliance sheets like it was a used napkin. We need speed. People watched, eyes darting between me and him, waiting for me to cry, to plead, to make a scene. I did none of those things. Instead, I unplugged my USB from the back of my monitor, slid it into my purse as calmly as a waitress pocketing a tip, and packed my things. One framed certificate, a photo of my niece, a succulent I'd kept alive for 7 years. That was it. 14 years in the company reduced to a small box of items and a quiet smile. No tears, no scene. Just me handing my badge to HR and walking out the front door at 4:57 p.m. 3 minutes before the end of the workday because I refused to give them even an extra hour of unpaid labor. I had been with Barrow Systems for 14 years. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. But I was the spine of vendor risk. If a vendor slipped a dangerous clause into a contract, I caught it. If a compliance checkpoint was about to be missed, I flagged it before legal even blinked. I was the escalation officer for our biggest infrastructure vendor. The one handling 70% of our payment operations. That wasn't symbolic. That was lifeblood. But Victor never looked, never asked, never read the contracts he signed. He was too busy mocking my binders, my systems, my old-fashioned checklists. What he didn't know was this. Last year, when our vendor updated their protocols, I quietly renegotiated our service authorization addendum. That made me the only one who could greenlight emergency access. Not it, not legal, not even the CEO, just me. And thanks to Victor's little tantrum, that authority had just walked out the door in a pair of worn flats and a cardigan that said, "Retired but dangerous." When I reached the sidewalk, I didn't cry. I didn't call my sister. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was clarity because Victor hadn't fired dead weight. He'd fired the wiring. And when you rip out the wiring, the lights always go out. By the time I got home, I had already drafted an email to a contact at our vendor. Just a short note, professional, attached with the necessary documentation. Nothing dramatic. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to take revenge. All I had to do was let the system they signed collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. The thing about corporate executions, they're never clean. You think you're cutting a person, but you forget their work seeps into the wiring. I was the wiring. And Victor had no idea that in just a few days his smirk would curdle into panic. For now, though, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the evening sun hit the glass. 14 years of invisible labor dismissed in a single sentence. But invisibility has its advantages. They had erased my name from the payroll. But in the paperwork that mattered, the contracts, the escalation chains, the vendor protocols, my name was carved in bold letters. Amanda Torres, sole authorized escalation officer. Victor thought he had removed a bottleneck. What he really did was toss the only key to the entire system into the trash. And in less than a week, when payments froze across Bayrock, the board would learn the truth the hard way. Because this wasn't just a job, it was a system. And I was the system. By Monday morning, Victor strutted into the leadership meeting like he'd just conquered Rome. He had his PowerPoint open before people even sat down. Slide 1. New era of efficiency. All caps, Arial. No data source, just a fat red arrow pointing upward. I wasn't there, of course, but I didn't need to be. A friend in it, Sam, sent me a screenshot with the message. He really thinks you were the problem. On slide 2, Victor had drawn a barraf comparing process times before Amanda versus after Amanda. No footnotes, no citations, just numbers he'd pulled from the ether. Proof that firing me had magically accelerated the company. Procurement bottlenecks are gone, he declared, grinning like a raccoon who had just found a buffet. We're fast-tracking agility. Nobody clapped, but nobody dared to contradict him either. When someone fires a 14-year veteran in public, people learn quickly to stay quiet. Fear spreads faster than facts. By Tuesday, cracks had already appeared. Sam messaged me again. First big payment batch failed. Jenna's panicking. Jenna was new, promoted from payroll assistant to AP lead just 3 weeks earlier. She wasn't trained for vendor compliance. She was smart, hardworking, but green. She'd flagged the issue right away. A red box had popped up in the system. Authorization missing. Escalation officer override required. Jenna asked Victor if she should route it through risk review. He waved her off. We don't need red tape. Just process it. Except she couldn't. The system wouldn't let her. By Wednesday the whispers started. Travel reimbursements bounced back. Software renewals froze. A regional sales manager sent 6 unanswered emails to finance about a hotel payment blocking a client retreat. One particularly sharp vendor rep threatened to withhold cybersecurity services if payment didn't arrive by close of business. The building began to buzz, not with productivity, but with unease. Slack channels filled with vague messages. Is procurement still handling vendor checks? Silence followed. Then someone from marketing dropped a dumpster fire. Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. Not working on my resume. No, not yet. Instead, I was watching vendor alerts roll in. Every failed payment, every flagged escalation landed in my personal archive. Why? Because I had mirrored every authorization chain for over a decade. People thought my checklists were old-fashioned. They weren't. They were precise, alphabetized, time-stamped. I had built the digital backbone no one else understood. Victor had fired a librarian without realizing the librarian also built the Dewey Decimal System. By Thursday morning, the chaos was undeniable. Payroll batches were stuck. Contractors complained. Even routine reimbursements got flagged. I heard from Sam again. He looked exhausted in the selfie he sent. Dark circles under his eyes. Half-empty energy drink in the frame. His text read, "Every engineer says the same thing. The payment gateway isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. And it's waiting for one thing, your credential string. My override ID, hard-coded into the vendor system. Can't they just replace it?" Yes. His reply came instantly. Not without vendor escalation. And guess who the vendor requires for escalation? I closed my eyes and exhaled. Somewhere across town, Victor was probably storming around his glass office, blaming interns and juniors for not fixing a simple system glitch. That's what men like him did. When reality didn't bend, they blamed the people holding it up. But it wasn't a glitch. It was protocol. I thought about the irony as I watered my succulent, the same one I carried out of the office. They had mocked my devotion to checklists, to binders, to careful signatures. But those checklists had kept the company alive quietly, invisibly for 14 years. And now, without me, the wires were exposed. Friday came like a storm. Vendors escalated directly to legal. One even froze active services. Another sent a formal notice citing non-responsiveness to escalation requests. Sam messaged me again. It's official. The vendor flagged Bayrock as non-compliant. Non-compliant. For a company like Bayrock, that wasn't a small bruise. It was a gunshot wound. It meant frozen accounts, halted services, contracts under review. And yet I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Revenge wasn't the point. Not for me. What I wanted was simple recognition of value. Not just for myself, but for every quiet worker who ever got dismissed as useless while propping up the entire system. Because here's the truth. Companies forget. They forget the Christmas weekends you spend rewriting protocols to prevent a compliance breach. They forget the late nights, the vendor calls, the clauses caught just before disaster. They remember only the loudest voices, the flashiest presentations until the lights go out. That Friday night, I sat in the glow of my lamp, sipping coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. In my inbox at a fresh vendor notice, immediate access restriction, account suspended. Attached was a PDF with my name embedded in the clause language like a tattoo. Escalation Officer Amanda Torres. I didn't smile. Not yet. I just saved it in a new folder on my desktop and named it something simple. Leverage Log Entry 001. Because this wasn't just a story of incompetence. It was a story about power, quiet, invisible power, and how quickly arrogance crumbles when it collides with structure. Victor thought he'd won. He thought speed mattered more than stability. But by the end of the week, his victory was already unraveling. The fuse had been lit. The only question now was how big the explosion would be. By Monday morning, the silence in Barrow's finance wing was louder than any alarm. No reimbursements had cleared. Contractor invoices stacked up like unpaid parking tickets. Payroll was due in 3 days, and the system still flashed the same red warning. Escalation Officer, override required. Victor strutted into the board prep call 5 minutes late, sweating slightly but forcing a grin. He clicked through his slides, still the same ones he'd been using, with efficiency gains plastered across the top. It's a minor disruption, he said, waving his hand. Temporary vendor side glitch. We've got it under control, but he didn't, and people knew it. One of the VPs asked quietly, "Is that why no one's been reimbursed since last Tuesday?" Victor chuckled nervously. "We're implementing an access patch through it. Should be resolved within 48 hours. Except it had already stopped replying to his emails. Sam told me in confidence that the engineers had run every test, checked every line of code. The system wasn't broken. It was locked by design, and the only key was me." Meanwhile at home, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of printed vendor notices. Each one highlighted the same root cause. Termination of sole authorized escalation officer. My name appeared again and again, a quiet reminder that 14 years of invisible work couldn't just be erased with a smirk. I didn't rush. I didn't call them. I simply documented everything. Each alert, each notice, neatly logged and dated. Entry 002. Entry 003. Entry 004. Back at Bayrock, panic began to leak through the cracks. By Tuesday, the vendor calls had turned from polite inquiries to direct threats. One cybersecurity vendor suspended active monitoring. Another froze access to a regional payment pipeline. And then came the biggest blow. Infernet Global, the infrastructure vendor that processed 70% of Bayrock's payments, flagged the account as non-compliant. That word again, non-compliant. Legal carried the printed notice into Victor's office. "Have you reviewed Clause 6.1 of the Service Authorization Addendum?" he asked. Victor didn't look up from his laptop. Clauses are legal fluff. Nobody enforces them, which for the record is something only con men and soon-to-be defendants ever say. On Wednesday, the whispers turned into full-blown murmurs. Department heads stopped sugarcoating the situation. Marketing couldn't pay contractors. Sales couldn't reimburse travel. HR had payroll batches bouncing back. Slack threads lit up with questions. Did we fire the person who ran compliance? One employee wrote in #general. No one answered. Meanwhile my phone buzzed. LinkedIn message. "Hi, Amanda. Sorry to bother. This is Tyler from Infernet Global. We're seeing an escalation issue on our end, and your name's still listed in the protocol binder. Are you still with Bayrock?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened my private archive and checked the vendor dashboard. Sure enough, my credential string was still hard-coded into the system. PMBBT14RS. Active, required, irreplaceable. By Thursday, Victor's mask began to slip. He stormed into the finance bullpen barking orders. Bypass the system. push payments manually. We're not waiting on some outdated protocol. But the system didn't care about his orders. Every attempted override bounced back. Engineers explained again that the credential string was embedded at the vendor level. Not editable, not replaceable. The only way forward was escalation. And the only escalation officer listed was me. By Friday morning, even the board couldn't ignore it anymore. Legal counsel briefed them bluntly. Without Amanda Torres's override credentials, Infernet Global has suspended access. You cannot process payments, reimbursements, or vendor invoices. You're in breach of contract. The CEO, gay-haired and 3 weeks from retirement, rubbed his temples. Define breach, meaning legal said flatly. We are exposed to audits, penalties, and potential lawsuits. Unless the escalation officer reinstates access, the company cannot function. And still Victor insisted. It's a systems error. We'll patch it. But no one believed him anymore. I meanwhile was calm. I'd spent my career holding the company together in silence. Now my silence spoke louder than any protest. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't planning a comeback. What I was doing was preparing, building my leverage log, documenting everything. Because when the call finally came, and it would, Bayrock would learn a lesson that far too many companies forget. You don't fire the firewall and expect the system to stay secure. That weekend, I sat in my living room, a stack of vendor notices beside me, my cat curled on the couch. I highlighted another clause with my name in bold. Saved another PDF into the leverage folder. Victor had thought I was nothing but a checklist. But the truth was simpler, sharper. I wasn't the checklist. I was the system. And soon the board was going to find out exactly what that meant. Monday arrived like a report deadline you can't postpone. I woke early, opened my laptop, and stared at the growing spine of my leverage log. Each entry calm, factual, time-stamped, vendors had escalated, legal had printed, finance had stalled. All roads led to the same line of text buried in a contract and branded with my name. At 8:42 a.m. Sam texted. Emergency board call at 9. Infernet CEO joining. Then a second message. Victor says he's got it handled. Actually laughed. Not out of cruelty, out of recognition. I've learned that arrogance always sounds the same right before it meets a wall. I wasn't invited to the call, obviously. But documents have a way of finding me. Legal in their efficiency had BCC'd the same compliance archive I built years ago and never fully shut off. So, while the board gathered behind their glass walls, I sat at my kitchen table, spooning cold yogurt and watching the edges of my work drift back into my inbox like tide water. At 9:01 the meeting started. First, the pre-functor greetings. Then Victor, 5 minutes late, clearing his throat over a shaky connection. I pictured him tugging at his tie and smiling like a hostage who'd rehearsed the word temporary. It's a minor disruption. He began. We're deploying an access patch with it. The general counsel didn't bother to hide the sigh. There is no patch, she said. The vendor has suspended access due to non-compliance with the Service Authorization Addendum Clause 6.1. Victor cut in clauses are procedural. We're operational silence, the kind with sharp edges, a chime. New participant joined Elias Grant, CEO Infernet Global. His voice carried that careful calm you hear from pilots during turbulence. Thank you for making time, he said. Let's keep this efficient. The CEO of Bayrock tried to get ahead of it. Elias, we've had some internal transitions. We're ready to update our authorization chain and would appreciate a temporary lift. While Elias raised a finger. I didn't see it, but I knew the gesture. It's universal among people who don't need volume to command a room. Before we discuss timelines, he said, I need to clarify a detail. Paper rustled. Your gateway overrides require the signature of the designated escalation officer listed in your SAA. Beat here. It reads Amanda Torres. There it was. My name spoken in a room I hadn't been allowed to enter for months before I left. Victor coughed. She's no longer with the company. Elias paused. When he spoke, his voice warmed by a degree. But That explains the failures we saw starting Tuesday. Another rustle. Then a sound I'll never forget. Gentle, surprised, edged with genuine disbelief. He laughed. "Wait," he said, not unkindly. "You fired your what?" I could almost hear the boardroom exhale, the split second where everyone checked if anyone else would confess to having missed the obvious. No one did. Elias continued. "Professional again. M. Torres's credential string is embedded in the onboarding protocol. You approved the revision last year. More paper. Any reassignment requires her authorization or a full re-execution cycle. 90 days, departmental sign-off, technical revalidation. You cannot pay vendors, reimburse employees, or complete renewals without that chain." The Bayrock CEO tried to retake the wheel. "Is there any interim option?" "There is a path forward," Elias said. "Miss Torres has already provided us documentation of her credential lineage and prior approvals. She contacted our legal office on Friday. We're reviewing a continuity proposal." My phone buzzed. New email. Infernet Legal. Receipt confirmed. Seen it 2 days ago. Seeing it again mid-call felt like a second confirmation of facts of value of the quiet weight of work. Victor attempted one last bluff. "We're prepared to submit updated signatories." "No," Elias said softly. "You submitted backdated forms this morning. Our counsel declined. We don't process fraud." Sam texted me a single word. "Yikes." Elias shifted tone. "Not cruel, just precise. When someone builds the system, don't be surprised when they know how to protect it. Miss Torres built yours. She kept you off 2 federal audit lists in the last 5 years. You probably didn't know I felt that one. Not because of the praise, because it was true, and because the room that should have known had never cared to ask." Legal slid across the table. I could hear the faint scrape in the recording that later reached my archive. The general counsel read, "Every service addendum since 2019 lists Amanda Torres as the sole escalation officer. Her signature appears on all overrides. We did not notify the vendor of her termination. We did not reassign credentials." "Then fix it," the CEO said, but it sounded like habit, not instruction. Victor spoke again, voice smaller now. "She was process, not strategy." Elias didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. If process fails, strategy is bankruptcy. No one argued. The call ended with action items that weren't really actions. Coordinate with vendor. Assess exposure. Prepare external messaging. They're the phrases companies say when they've already lost the first battle and are pretending it's still halftime. Closed my laptop. My apartment was quiet. The steady hum of the fridge. The soft thud of my cat landing on a chair. Matey. The kettle clicked off. If you're watching this and you've ever been told your work is just a checklist, hear me. Checklists are promises. Every box is a barrier against chaos. Systems don't fail suddenly. They fail exactly where someone decided a promise didn't matter. At noon, a new email arrived from Infernet's executive office. Subject: Consulting Engagement Continuity and Oversight. The proposed role: Independent Vendor Liaison Authority to restore access at my discretion. Terms: fair rate, generous. Scope: mine to define. I didn't gloat. I didn't screenshot it for friends. I added it to the leverage log and wrote a single line beneath. Value is only invisible to people who don't do the work. Back at Bayrock, they drafted a second emergency call for the afternoon. I wasn't on it either. I didn't need to be. The room would look the same. Tired faces, quiet legal, Victor avoiding eye contact with the future. By evening, Tyler from the vendor texted, "If you're up for it, we'd like you on a call tomorrow to outline restoration steps." Your timeline. I stared at the message, then typed back, "I'll send terms in the morning. Because this isn't about revenge. Never was. This is about naming the work and then pricing it. And if they want the lights back on, they'll read the checklist out loud." Tuesday morning, I woke before my alarm. The apartment was quiet in that way cities sometimes are after a storm. Traffic there but dulled. The air lighter. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and read the subject line waiting at the top of my inbox. Consulting engagement. Continuity and oversight. Final terms. I read slowly, not because I needed to but because I could. Scope: restore access, revalidate credential chains, audit controls, train successors, authority, mine, rate, generous, duration, flexible with an annual retainer. I added it to the leverage log, then drafted a short reply to Infranet's legal team. Accepted. Beginning today, I attached my NDA and a single-page implementation plan with my initials in the corner. A habit, a promise to myself. At 9:30 a.m., Tyler looped me into a vendor kickoff. No drama, just names, roles, and a clear goal. Get Bayrock operational without compromising the protocols that kept them safe. I listened more than I spoke. When it was my turn, I outlined next steps. Verify the credential lineage. Rebuild escalation routing, temporarily proxy my token while reassignments are vetted, and set up a dual control process so no one person could ever pull what Victor tried again. Tyler exhaled audibly. I've missed this voice. He said then more formally. We'll follow your runbook. At 11:02 a.m. Bay's CO emailed me directly. No subject fluff, no exclamation points. Cool, professional and tired. Amanda, we request your assistance. We will accept your terms. I stared at the sentence longer than I expected. It wasn't triumph. I felt it was relief, like watching a building stop swaying after the earthquake subsides. I replied with a list, not revenge. Requirements. 1. Acknowledgement in writing filed with the board minutes that the escalation chain was built correctly and failed because leadership ignored it. 2. A stipend for the contractors and employees who'd waited on reimbursements paid immediately upon restoration. 3. Protection for the juniors who'd been scapegoated. Jenna in AP, Milo in IT. No retaliatory reviews, no performance improvement plans. 4. Mandatory training for executives on vendor risk taught by me. Recorded and added to onboarding for future leaders. 5. A commitment to a culture change in writing. Checklists are not optional. They are policy. I read it again. None of it was flashy. All of it was structural. The CO called at 11:19 a.m. His voice was rough at the edges. We'll sign. All of it. There was a pause. I heard him inhale, then say quietly, I'm sorry, Amanda. I believed him enough to continue. By early afternoon, I had a temporary proxy in place with Infranet. We validated the chain, tested a dummy payment in the sandbox, then a small live reimbursement, $100 to a sales rep who'd been floating hotel charges on a personal card. Cleared in seconds. In the Slack export I received later, someone posted a single confetti emoji in general. Then another person typed, We're back. I didn't smile yet. It wasn't fixed. It was moving. At 2:40 p.m. I joined a joint call. Me on vendor side, Bayrock on theirs. Legal, finance, operations, no Victor. HR had sent the email that morning. Effective immediately, Mr. Hale has resigned. Resigned is a corporate verb with flexible geometry. I let it pass. The meeting was clinical, which is how restoration should feel. I walked them through the map they'd chosen not to read. Where escalation sits, why dual control exists, how overrides leave audit trails. I watched shoulders loosen as process replaced panic. When we got to the last slide, ownership, I didn't overplay it. I just said what went wrong wasn't a system error. It was a choice. No one argued. We staged the releases. Reimbursements first, then vendor invoices by tier, then renewals with continuity clauses. Each step verified, logged, checked twice. By 5:12 p.m. the largest stuck payment, a renewal for the cybersecurity partner, pushed through. They restored monitoring within the hour. The dashboard slid from red to amber, then settled on a steady green. It wasn't dramatic. It was a dimmer switch turning the room back on. I closed my laptop and let the quiet come back. My cat thumped onto the chair opposite me and settled like a paperweight. Outside, the late sun found the spine of my succulent and lit up a thin seam along one leaf I'd thought was gone. It wasn't. It was just healing. That night, the board sent me a countersigned letter fulfilling the 5 conditions. The stipend hit accounts. Jenna wrote me a thank you that I didn't deserve but saved anyway. Milo changed his LinkedIn headline back to something that sounded like hope. Sam texted, "Drinks on me when you want them." I told him I'd bring a checklist for the bar. Sometime after 9, I opened the file where I keep phrases I've heard about my work. Useless, old-fashioned, just process. Underneath I typed a new line. Process is how people keep their promises to each other. I didn't go back to Bayrock. I didn't need to. My consulting agreement sat with the vendor now. My calendar filled with audits, trainings, and the kind of work that keeps things boring in the best possible way. When the world is quiet, the systems are working. If you're watching this and you've been told your value is small because your work isn't loud, hear me. You're not background. You are the wiring. And when someone laughs at the checklist, remember they're laughing at the thing that keeps the lights on. Wednesday morning, the CEO sent one final note. We've posted a policy change. Checklists are now mandatory for all executive decisions involving vendors. Required sign-off, legal and operations. There was a PDF attached with my framework, the one I'd built in evenings. Ins ran over my calendar. I made coffee. I watched steam rise. I let myself smile, small and private. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about recognition, about the quiet architecture of trust, about the cost of pretending the boring parts don't matter. I signed the last page of my vendor runbook and closed the binder. The spine cracked the way a well-used book does. Not breaking, just settling. Clear your desk, he'd said. I did. And then I drew the map they'll use long after anyone remembers our names.